Hello class, and welcome to video 17 on Habit 5, Part 4, Seek First to Understand, Then to be Understood. So, again, as we're talking about problems that we have in seeking to understand and to be understood, there are 4 autobiographical responses that we make that get in the way. One is that we have a tendency to evaluate or either agree or disagree with what the other person's saying rather than trying to understand. Second, we ask probing questions from our frame of reference, and that gets in the way. Third, we give advice or counsel based on our own experience, which is probably vastly different from the person with whom we're speaking. And then finally, we interpret. We try to figure people out and explain their motives and behaviors. Again, that's based on our perception and our paradigm. So the problem with probing is that it uses the language of logic, not sentiment and emotion. Covey says this is the main reason parents did not get close to their children. I remember, for example, my children wanting me to buy back-to-school clothes that had a certain brand name on it, and I tried to understand the logic behind that. It wasn't logical. It was just something they wanted to be popular with the other kids. So there's some skills of empathic listening that we need to develop. First is not just mimicking the content, and not just rephrasing the content. So not just saying what they said or putting it back into our own words, and not just reflecting the feeling, like you're feeling sad or you're feeling happy, you're feeling angry, but rephrasing the content and reflecting the feeling. This gives the other party psychological air and helps them work through whatever the issue is. It removes barriers to communication. So should you give advice? Advise only when the response is logical, and I would say only when asked for. Empathically listen when the response is emotional instead of trying to give advice. And then you should listen for inspiration to what you feel is the right thing to do. And you have to have the sincere desire to understand. Here's a second personal example of using Habit 5. I alluded to this one a long time ago. It is the performance appraisal. So I had a performance appraisal with the dean of the School of Business who wasn't really good at human relations management areas. And everyone had come in to him and they would leave the room yelling or screaming or red-faced or crying. And it was just a terrible experience. And so he called me in, and I knew I'd only had an average year. And I decided before going in to use Habit 5 and seek first to understand, not to defend myself, but just to understand his point of view. So here is the actual dean. He's no longer with us. He's already passed away. But he said to me, "Steve, you've done some good work, but I'm concerned about several areas of your job." Now, that right off the start, all I'm going to remember is I'm concerned about several areas of your job, not that you've done some good work. So I said, I certainly want to understand where I've fallen down. Tell me why you say that. And he said, okay, I will. 1, 2, 3. He started listing things. I remember one of the things he said was, you spend too much time doing workshops and consulting and it interferes with your teaching. And I thought to myself, well, you idiot. When I go out and do those outside things, I learn things that I can bring back into my classroom and share with my students. But I didn't say that. I said, why do you say that? And he says, well, like last week you were doing a workshop over at the hospital and you were 15 minutes late getting back for your class and your class started late. It interferes with your teaching. And I said, you know, you're right. I need to not do that and never be late to my classes like that. I understand what you mean. What else? And so he told me what else, and the list went on. And as he went through this, I never defended myself. I just kept asking questions until he felt like I understood the point he was making. And then finally at the end he says, I feel this year hasn't been reflective of your true work. I'll tell the dean to ignore my rating when deciding on raises. So I'm still going to get a raise. That's good news. I said, thanks. He said, I hear you're very effective in the classroom, and next year I'm going to nominate you for Teacher of the Year. I said, well, that's great, thanks. And he says, I know you want to go to that management conference in Las Vegas this summer. Submit the papers, and I'll approve it. I said, thanks. Not bad for an average year. Thanks, Covey. True story. This is what really happened. And after that time, he felt like I understood him and where he was coming from so good that when he had a new idea or a new initiative he wanted to consider doing, he would come and talk to me and ask me my opinion because he felt like I understood. So the habit 5 can really work miracles. Okay, so after we understand the other person, then we have to seek to be understood ourselves. This requires maturity. You need to balance courage and consideration and learn to make an effective presentation, which consists of 3 different parts. First is called the ethos. That's your personal credibility or faith in your integrity and competency. And this is increased by first understanding. So that's very important. Second is pathos, the empathic side, or feeling and alignment with the emotional thrust of others. If people are sad because someone died, you don't want to come in and start cracking jokes, for example. And third is logos, the logic or reasoning. Of those 3, pathos is the most important and persuasive part of a presentation, the emotional thrust. One-on-one. Covey says when you're dealing with someone else and you're seeking first to understand and you really listen, you become influenceable. And being influenceable is the key to influencing others. In other words, once you really understand the other person's point of view, they are more likely to try to understand your point of view. Because when you listen, you learn. And when they listen, they learn. Remember, though, when you're discussing things that you can't force matters of the heart, such as trust and love. You can't be like my boss here that says, from now on, I want everyone to like me, and since I'm the boss, you have to do it, like it or not. That doesn't work. I remember having a commander in the Air Force that said, I have an open-door policy. The only problem was I could never get by the first sergeant who was at the desk outside his office to talk to him. So the best way to gain this understanding and trust is by trusting and loving others, and then they will reciprocate. Benjamin Franklin is quoted as saying, the best way to make a friend is ask him to do you a favor. I actually used this one time. I was trying to get close to a guy in my church, and I didn't know him very well. And I had 5 pine trees in my front yard that were leaning because there's a slight hill, and I knew they were going to take down the power lines and just cause all kinds of problem whenever there was an ice storm. So I remembered my friend, whose name was Tom, had used to have been into the tree removal business and had equipment. So I asked him if he would come over with his equipment and help me take down these trees on a Saturday. He came and he brought his 2 teenage sons with him, and they knew how to use the equipment, and we worked all day Saturday taking those trees down. And we got to know each other better. And after that time, he considered me a friend. Not because I'd done something for him, but because he had done something for me. Okay, let me tell you about a close friend of mine. His name is Dean Curtis. This is him when he was younger. And what I call the Curtis communication theory of motivation. So Dean had been he was a communications professor. And when he was in college, he was a national debate champion and a great speaker. And one day in one of his classes, he was teaching in Nebraska, where we were both teaching at a college. One of the students came up to him after class and said, I'm really impressed with you. And I work for the Department of Social Services, and I'm the coordinator for this county and the neighboring county. And the state's coming out with a new program where we're trying to get people off of welfare. And to put together a program or workshop or series of workshops where we try to get people off of welfare and want to work and to help them to find a job. And I think you'd be great at this, and I'd like for you to submit a bid to do it. And he says, I don't know how to even fill out the paperwork. She said, I'll help you put together the proposal. He said, okay. So he decided to do it, and he decided to make it profitable if he got the contract. And he got the contract. So then he had to take a leave of absence from the college, got another communications professor to take a leave of absence with him to be his partner. He asked me if I was interested in being his partner, and I said, are you kidding? I've got a full-time permanent job that's safe and secure. I'm not doing this. But he did it, and his wife was the bookkeeper, so it's a three-person company to begin with. And he started doing workshops for people on welfare. They were required to come to his workshops, which lasted about a week, and he would try to get them to be motivated to want to work and give them job finding skills. He was told that by the state officials that if he could get 20% of the people off of welfare that attended his workshops, it would be a success. Well, he held his first workshop and he had 14 people attend. 13 of them found jobs right away. And the 14th one, he ended up hiring. So he was really successful. And the next year, all through that year, he had an 85% rate of success. The people who attended his workshops got jobs, and he had written in the contract if they stayed employed for at least a year, he got another bonus. So the next year, all the counties in Nebraska wanted him to do it. The following year, surrounding states, and before long, he was a consultant for the Department of Labor. He had offices in New York City. He moved to Connecticut for a while. Then he moved to Milwaukee, had offices there. He eventually had to hire about 200 people and built his own building. And about, 8 or 10 years later, as the company was going great, he sold it to a financial firm from Boston and retired as a multimillionaire. And I thought, and I refused to go into business with him? What an idiot I was. Well, how did he do this? Well, here's his theory. I call it the Curtis communication theory of motivation. It's simply event plus language equals motive. Event minus language equals nothing. What in the heck does that mean, you might say? Well, let me give you an example. So Dean and I were both friends with a guy named Steve, and his wife was named Janet. Steve and Janet lived in a mobile home outside of town. Steve worked for the Department of Highways in the state of Nebraska, construction work. His wife stayed at home. They had 3 small kids. They were all preschool age. And you know how kids are at that age. They get earaches and colds and stuff a lot. So his wife was there with no car during the day with those small kids, and just kind of trapped in that situation. They lived outside the town, no neighbors nearby. Janet needed to have a hysterectomy, and Janet and Steve decided together that it might not be a good idea for her to come back home and recover in that situation they were living in. So it was decided she would go to a friend's home who lived in a city called North Platte, which was 100 miles from where we lived, which was in Kearney. And he would take care of the kids in the morning, get them up, and then he would take them to members of the church around that would take care of them, different kids to different places. In the evening, he would come back and he would pick up the kids and take them home and feed them and do the laundry and so forth and put them to bed while she was recovering. Well, this went on for some time. And after a while, he kind of got tired of this. His wife had left, and he wanted her to come back. And one day she called him on the phone, and he says, "Boy, we sure miss you. We sure want you to come home. When are you coming home?" And she said, "I want you to send me the microwave." And he said, "Send me the microwave? What are you talking about?" And she says, "I want the microwave." And he said, "Well, when are you coming home?" And she said, "I'm not, ever," and hung up the phone. So there he was, stuck with these 3 small kids and no wife, not knowing what to do. And so he would talk to people about it. One day he found Dean Curtis and me, and he was telling us about this situation, and he said, "I can't believe it. She just deserted us. She shows unnatural affection for her kids, and by cracky, I'm not giving her the microwave." He was angry. He was upset. And he would tell everybody this. A few days later, he happened to be driving by my house, and he saw Dean outside, who was leaving my home to go somewhere with me saying goodbye, and he pulled into the driveway, and we thought, "Oh no, here we go again. We got to listen to the story." But this time he said something different. He said, "I just can't believe Janet. She was kind of trapped out there in that little mobile home. She had no life. She needed to find herself, and I just wish I could do something to help her." Now I thought, man, is this guy schizophrenic or what? But my friend Dean said, wait a minute, let me ask you a question. He said, the other day when you were mad and talked about desertion and you were angry and you're not going to give her the microwave, who'd you been talking to before you talked to us? And he says, well, the guys at work, other construction workers. Some of them been divorced too, and their wives had left them, and they said it's time to get tough. And by cracky, that's what I felt. And he says, okay, so before you came to see us today, who were you talking to? He said, well, I was talking to Darlene, a friend of Janet's, and she told me what Janet had confided in her, that she's trapped and had no life. And man, it just made me feel bad and I want to help her. So this is a good example of his theory. The wife leaves, surrounded with words like desertion, unnatural affection, and your motivation is anger, no microwave. Take the same event, surround it with words like trapped. She needs to find herself, and his motivation was he wanted to help her and felt compassion. That's the Curtis motivation theory. So how did he use this with people who were unemployed? He found that when people were unemployed, that people would describe them as lazy, they don't want to work, they were social workers, employment counselors, people that knew them. They don't really want to work, they missed their appointments and so forth, and they found no jobs. When he got him in the workshops, he worked with them and he addressed them differently, and he helped them understand that the words to describe their situation was they were underutilized. They had untapped potential, and they went out and found jobs. It was an amazing theory. So this idea is that if you use words to describe an event that are positive, you get more positive results. So Dean and I did a series of workshops for a local hospital, and we wanted this contract so bad that we told them that if they would hire us to do these workshops, I think there were 5 of them, half-day workshops, we would give them like 10 hours of free consulting. So they said, okay, and we made a deal. We did the workshops, which were successful. And then we went over to the hospital and we said, what do you want us to do? And they said, we want you to give us advice, consulting on what we should do with some employees. And we said, sure. So they described the employee named Suzanne with the following adjectives. She's energetic, she's innovative, she cares about her people, she knows her stuff, and she's determined. What would you say management should do with Suzanne? Typical responses are promote her, give her a raise, make her a trainer. Sounds like a great employee. Then there's the employee called Zelda. She is described as pushy, won't follow procedures, arrogant, conceited, self-centered. What would you recommend management do with Zelda? You might say something, well, like terminate her, fire her, make her go through training, demote her, discipline her some way or another. The problem is that Suzanne and Zelda are the same person. I just gave them different names. And they were described by different people with different words. And it was the same behavior. For example, here are the first list and here's the second list. Okay, so she would come in and try to do things differently and push people to perform better because she's a supervisor. She's innovative. She'd come up with new ideas, do things differently. Does that mean she wasn't following procedures? She would tell people how they can improve. Was that arrogant? She would tell people how to do the job better. Was she conceited? So it's the same behavior, but again, if you change the words, the description of the behavior from the list on the left to the list on the right, you want to fire her. The list on the left, you want to promote her. So again, it's the words that describe the event that often make the difference. So I thought I'd go through a rewording exercise with you and give you some examples of how we might reword behaviors that we've seen to make them more positive and have a more positive impact on people. Now, I've done this several times and a lot of workshops and a lot of classes, so I've got an answer. So I'll just let you think and then I'll give you the answer. So for example, lazy. How might you reword that? Think of someone who's lazy. What is it they're doing and how could we maybe label their behavior differently? How about they're delegating or easygoing or relaxed? That's the same behavior, labeled differently. How about someone who's loud? Maybe they're vocal, expressive, excited. I come home from work and my wife says, take off your professor voice. I'm excited. I want to lecture. Someone is stubborn. That doesn't sound good. Maybe we should say they're determined. They want to make it happen. Someone is a rebel. That sounds bad. Maybe they're an innovator or creative or want to come up with new ways of doing things. How about someone is hard-headed? That sounds bad. Maybe again they're self-assured or confident or determined. Someone's a brown-noser. You've probably heard that term, meaning they're always second up to the boss, so to speak. Well, maybe they're a team player, cooperative, or helpful. Someone is labeled as a goof-off. Seems like they're always goofing off and playing around. Well, maybe they're just a fun guy or laid back. A troublemaker. Maybe that person is a natural leader or evaluator. Someone's an airhead. Seems like their head's always in the air and they're kind of daydreaming or something. Maybe they're just happy-go-lucky. Someone is opinionated, have strong opinions. Maybe that just means they're directive, persuasive, or committed to principles. Someone's nitpicky. Every time you hand in a report, they nitpicky. You hand in a paper to a professor and he puts red marks all over. Maybe that just means they're precise or particular or want you to improve. Overbearing. A boss is overbearing. Maybe they're aggressive, zealous, take charge, or a go-getter. A chronic complainer. Okay. I remember I used to know a faculty member that always complained about students. I just didn't want to be around him. Well, maybe he was analytical or wanted improvement or was a problem finder. Someone is moody, always moody. A group in my workshop came up with a great one for this, a daily surprise. Sensitive or in touch with feelings. An instigator. Oh, that sounds like a troublemaker. So it's a leader or moves others or inspiring. Slow. Now, I'm going to stop here and give you an example. I once did a job with my brother who had a great background in computer programming, and we got a contract with a restaurant supply company in Winston-Salem. And they wanted us, this is back when WordPerfect was used for word processing rather than Word, and you could create macros or shortcuts within Word and almost do programming. And they wanted me to use these macros in Word to put together a system for them to create invoices, to price items, and to create bills and so forth. So I took my brother with me to do that, and I knew how to create macros really good. So I would be creating the macros, and he said, wait a minute, what did you do? I got to write that down. We need to document. I said, we don't need to document. He says, yeah, we need to put together a user's manual that tells them what we're doing and how to do it and why we're doing it. I said, that's just going to take forever. We're only getting so much money for this, and the longer it takes, the less we're making per hour. He says, no, we got to do it. We got to do it. So we did it. It took a long time, and I said, I'm never going to work with my brother again. That took too long. However, about 3 weeks after we finished the job and had been paid, I got a phone call from the company. They said, can you come back down here and take a look at this? This system isn't working correctly. It doesn't compute the tax correctly or something like that. So I thought, it's been 3 weeks since I created that stuff. I can't remember what I did. But then I remembered that my brother had made me create a user's manual and documentation of everything I did. So I went to the business. I pulled out the documentation about how we computed the tax, for example, and saw what it was supposed to do and how it was supposed to do it and the steps, and saw somebody had changed something by accident, and I changed it right back, and it worked, and they thought I was a genius. I wasn't a genius. My brother was thorough and deliberate and careful. So I thought he was slow. It turned out he was more deliberate and careful than I was. I was more careless, how's that, or involved in the task, independent, hard worker. Someone may be labeled as unprofessional. Maybe a more positive way is to label them as informal or inexperienced. A woman is labeled as a worldly woman. Sounds like a lady of the evening, doesn't it? Maybe sophisticated, well-traveled, caring and sharing. Well, that's enough of that, and that's enough of Habit 5. So I say the journey continues. I hope you enjoyed Habit 5, and video 18 will introduce you to our next concept, which I think may be motivation. So we'll see. I'll have to look it up and see. Anyway, thanks for your attention.